I found myself being a salesperson and selling my product to medical practitioners who in my gut I knew weren't going to be good for the show. They weren't going to benefit from it. But at that time, I'm like, hey, there's more cash flow for me to continue to grow this thing. And realized not long after that I should have gone with my gut.
Who are you?
Our lives are defined by two things and two things only: the commitments that we make and the integrity we have to keep them. I lacked an understanding of how other people perceived those core values in their own world and their own approach to life, which was incredibly arrogant on my part and very narrow-minded. I was absolutely guilty of micromanaging creative processes. We could have saved a whole lot of time and aggravation. It was a matter of who had more money. It did not go well. They absolutely made more money, but the thing that I did not recognize was that it made it very difficult for them to plan. I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. I think in my heart, I wish I did, but I think the business side of me recognizes that that is to some degree a necessary evil. And that was one of the things that sort of triggered for me, maybe it's time for me to think about selling the company. Absolutely believe it was the universe lacing up its boots saying, I'm giving you the time. I'm giving you the option. Okay, time is up. You're out. Go figure out what else to do.
Who are you?
I am Marc Robertz-Schwartz. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. So tell me about Marc Robertz-Schwartz. Who is that person?
I grew up in New Jersey, went to school to study basically television because I was a television brat as a kid, just loved television. Grew up on that. If my parents truly wanted to punish me, they took television away from me. I found loopholes. If they said I can't watch TV for a week, I would sit outside the family room and I would listen to the family listening to TV. So I found the loopholes in those punishments. But I knew very early on I wanted to work in television. And so once I graduated, I worked in TV stations up and down the East Coast from Maine to Miami, working primarily in creative services, promotions, marketing, programming, and content development. Got recruited by a place here in Central Florida called The Villages, which is the nation's largest senior retirement community, to run their 24-hour cable channel. At one point, had 100 people reporting to me, producing 18 original hours of programming, and started up their in-house marketing agency. And when the economy crashed in 2008, I was laid off from that job along with the rest of my department. And that was essentially the universe kicking me in the butt and saying, I know you've been miserable in this job for the last 6 months, but you've been too lazy to do anything about it because you're getting paid nicely and you've got some nice perks, but it hurts to get out of bed in the morning. So here I am at the end of 2008 with a horrible economy and decided I either needed to find a job or start something. I tried to do both for a while, realized I wasn't doing either of those very well, and finally picked a lane and said it's time for me to start a company. And I launched something called Hometown Health TV, which kind of tapped into my passion of video production, storytelling. And the reason I went the healthcare route was because at that time, that was the only industry that was growing in our area. As more and more seniors were moving here, the physicians and medical practitioners were following. So I identified an area where there could be an opportunity to make a living and created Hometown Health TV, which as we grew that into a full service marketing and production company, rebranded as Red Apples Media. And that kind of brings us up to essentially where I think we are in our conversation.
Beautiful. And I guess just for myself and the audience, when you say it's like Hometown Health TV and it's like healthcare within TV, like what does that actually mean or do? Is that like you're promoting pharmaceuticals or like you're working with promotion, like doctor focused programming, or like what does that actually mean?
We were actually pretty cutting edge at the time. What we were producing was a monthly 60-minute program that was subscription based. So we had one podiatrist in our program, we had one oncologist, one ENT, and they were basically paying a 12-month subscription for us to create monthly content for them. And then that would run in a 60-minute loop that was distributed across the doctor's offices that participated in our network. We eventually grew that to the local cable access station. And then that at the time, remember 2008, 2009, we were all just starting to kind of figure out what YouTube was. We were trying to figure out what Facebook was. And what we were showing them was the value of video. I use this phrase, the Pope loves video. POPE is an acronym, produce once, put everywhere. And it really was the only investment that we could get them to understand that once that content was created, there was a ton of ways that we could distribute it. If you wanted to own 5 billboards in the area, you had to pay for 5 billboards. But if you had a piece of video content and you wanted to put it on 5 different platforms, generally speaking, you didn't have to pay to do that. You had that content. So it was a big learning curve for the marketplace, which was typically very print driven. They love the monthly glossy magazines and that kind of thing. And so we produced 167 consecutive episodes. We won 12 Telly Awards, all kinds of other community recognition from the Florida Department of Health, things like that. And then we eventually wound it down during COVID, in large part because people stopped going to doctors' offices for a period of time. So we didn't have an audience. We weren't able to go in and gather content on a monthly basis. So we had a really nice run. But by then, Red Apple's media had diversified its offerings and its portfolio of clients, so that it wasn't like that didn't shut us down. We were smart enough to say, okay, if that goes away, we need to be able to do other things to stay in business.
Right. And when you transitioned to Red Apple, like, why did you transition to Red Apple? Like, why did you decide to make that name and branding change? I mean, sometimes it feels like you watch businesses change their name, like HBO changing it to HBO Max to then Max, and now we're back to HBO Max. It's like, why is a company even doing that? So why the decision for you at that point to change it to Red Apple?
We had built a really solid reputation in the marketplace as Hometown Health TV. People knew us for one thing, and I did that intentionally. When I went to market with one thing. We were producing this monthly 60-minute medical program. And two things were starting to happen. Our medical clients were saying, we love working with you. What else can you do for us? Can you guys do brochures? Can you do business cards? Can you do websites? And then we had non-medical clients saying, I was sitting in the doctor's office, I saw that video thing. Do you work with realtors? Do you work with attorneys? Do you work with custom home builders? And so we had to broaden our scope at that point because we had built a reputation for quality and community engagement. So sticking with Hometown Health TV no longer really represented what we did. Now, the fun story about where Red Apple's media came from was the Hometown Health icon had a red apple in it. And when I went to trademark it, I was blocked by the Apple Corporation. I got a nasty letter from them basically saying, you cannot trademark Hometown Health TV. You cannot trademark your logo with an apple in it. And I was perplexed by that. I'm like, there's all kinds of other businesses that have apples in their logos, and like Applebee's, grocery stores. Like, how did they get away with it? What I came to learn early on was it wasn't a matter of who was right and who was wrong. It was a matter of who had more money. And I even remember saying to this attorney, who I'm pretty sure was like a summer intern, I said, I'll tell you what, send me a new iPad and I'll drop the trademark and we'll call it even. He's like, yeah, I can't give you anything. So I dropped the trademark on the logo. I did trademark the name and still own the trademark Hometown Health TV. So when it came to rebrand, we thought about how do we evolve something that existed that people would recognize and remember. So we took the apple from the Hometown Health logo and we built Red Apple's media around that logo. A little bit of sort of thumbing our nose at the Apple Corporation. And I'll tell you what, I went the longest time without buying any Apple products for our production company, just out of spite to them. And if you're a stockholder, I apologize because I'm sure I was individually having an adverse effect on your stock portfolio. But I eventually lost the battle as we grew, and I had, I think at one point, 4 or 5 editors. They were all saying, look, man, we understand the backstory, but we got to get Max to run it as what it is that we want to do from an editing standpoint. So that's sort of the fun backstory on Red Apple's media.
Yeah, very cool. And in your book, like The Red Apple Way, like you talk about that business being born out of sort of like anxiety and desperation, right? You said you're in the middle of the 2008 crash, you've lost your job, and you're like, I got to figure out a way. So, and then in that book, that's really focused around these like different values that you have and that you've built the business around. And so I'm curious, like, how did you transition from building something out of desperation to anchoring something like deeply within those values? Did those values emerge through the process of creating the business, or was it something that you went and established at some point and then, cool, we're going to do this? Or like, how did that all come about?
At that point, I was about 25 years into my career. And I worked for a plethora of organizations. I mean, I worked for an NBC-owned station as a vice president of creative, and then I worked for small market television stations. And I had the fortune of working with some really good people and some not so good people. So I kind of learned along the way what I felt was going to make a good leader, a good company. When I started the company, it was just me sitting in a 10 by 10 office in a business incubator in our community. And I knew in my head how I wanted to conduct business. I knew what my values were. But as the company started to grow, I started to realize that I needed to articulate that to the people that I was hiring. They needed to understand that I operated a certain way. And at first, And I talk a little bit about this in the book. At first, when you're starting a company, the biggest thing is cash flow. And so I found myself being a salesperson and selling my product to, in some cases, medical practitioners who in my gut I knew weren't going to be good for the show. They weren't going to benefit from it. But at that time, it was early on. I'm like, hey, there's more cash flow for me to continue to grow this thing. And realized, or not long after that, that I should have gone with my gut. There's a story about one particular individual who had a very heavy foreign accent. And he was very dry, very knowledgeable, but he just could not communicate on a layman's level. And this 60-minute show would come to a grinding halt every single month during his 2.5-minute segment. And he said to me, he goes, I don't think I'm getting anything out of this. And I said, I think you're right. And I let him out of his contract early, which allowed us to have a good relationship. And we wound up picking other work up from him. We built his website. We did some print collateral for him. I could have absolutely held him to his contract legally, but that wasn't going to do either of us any good. So those core values started to resonate for me. And then it was a matter of figuring out how do I articulate them to my organization, to my clients, to my vendors, because the vendors represent us as an organization. If you tell me you're going to have a print piece ready for us by a certain date, that's what I'm telling my client. That's now my reputation on the line. Don't give me a date that you can't deliver on. And so they understood that I had a certain expectation. And that's sort of how those core values started to grow.
And what I thought was fascinating about what you just said too is that it started off with like your personal values. You knew what your personal values were. Like you hear a lot of conversation about values, and I've definitely been in different like business retreat kind of things where we come up with those values and clarify them. And I've gone through my own process to eventually identifying mine. But like, how did you come about yours? Because this was like around 2008. Like right now, I'd say values is a pretty like strong conversation for a lot of people, like having a values-driven life and doing those kinds of things. So, but this is 2008. I don't think it was as popular at that point, especially on the individual level. Like companies might have them, like you said, plastered on the boards or whatever it is, but like individuals really kind of taking that ownership. So where did those emerge for you, or like how did you develop or tap into those?
As I said, I think a lot of it had to do with the people that I worked for previously. I picked things up along the way. Integrity has always been an important thing for me. It is a nickel word if not used properly, and it frustrates me when people use it improperly or are not truly committed to what it means. Integrity was a big deal. So when I started selling hometown health to people, I felt icky. I always said, for all the years I worked in television, I was encouraged many times, you should transfer over into TV sales. That's really where the money is. And I kept saying, I'm not a salesman. What I didn't really think about was the fact that as the promotions and creative services person at that TV station, I was in the business of sales. My job was to sell the TV station to its viewers. The programming, the news anchors, our involvement in the community. I was in sales, but I never saw it in the way that I defined how sales was defined in my mind. So now I've got my own business and I've got to sell a subscription to a medical practitioner, when I realized I was sort of going against the grain of what I believed in, which was I'm much better at relationships. I suck at sales. And I had an epiphany along the way where I just had to make that pivot. And once I started to develop relationships, I was much more successful at what I felt like I wanted to achieve with this endeavor.
Yeah. You said something around...
I suck at sales? You like that?
So I have maybe this is like a tangent, but I have a joke that like, part of the reason why I'm really great at sales is because I suck at it. I can't really sell things I don't believe in, right? And so I think when you're coming from that place of like authenticity and genuine integrity, and you're willing to be like, I think this thing actually works, and I actually I don't really sell a lot of things because in some ways my trust barrier is so high, like to actually get me to want to tell people, because I also know I'm very persuasive. I've known that a lot of my life. And so I'm almost like guarded around, oh, do I want to tell somebody about this thing? Because they might go use it. And then that hurts my trust, right? So if that doesn't work out the way that I want to, if I'm just going through an excited phase about it in the short term. So I'm wanting to make sure that things are good. But where I wanted to go with that was like, you talked about the word integrity. And I think that's a word that means a lot to me in different ways. You talked about, well, most people say this word out, but it's not necessarily like proper. They're not using it in the correct way. It's kind of just a word that gets thrown out there, which I could talk about words like that for all day. But I'm curious for you, what does integrity mean to you? How do you see it like often get used or not get used correctly? And like, how do you define integrity for yourself, and how do you fulfill that value?
From the time Our daughter was about 6 years old, I think, is when I first introduced a statement to her that I will bet you $1,000 that if you were meeting me for coffee and my daughter walked in and you said, "What are your lives defined by?" She will tell you the line that I started to teach her way back then. Our lives are defined by two things and two things only: the commitments that we make and the integrity we have to keep them. And if you really think about life in general and what that boils down to, it's really pretty true. And that became a mantra of our family. Don't make a commitment to something that you can't deliver on. There are soft commitments, but to me, those aren't worth much. And then there are the hard commitments. If I tell my daughter I'm going to pick her up at dance practice at a certain time, she knows that she is not waiting for me for 20 minutes because I got hung up on a phone call, because I made that commitment to her that I will be there. And then the integrity part really comes from being truthful with yourself first and foremost. You can claim to be a person of integrity. And if you're not, you might be fooling other people, but you're not fooling yourself. It's about being honest. It's about being authentic. It's about making a difference in the lives that we have to live for however long that we're here. And that was really one of the driving forces. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but the Red Apples Way is the 9 core values that spell out red apples. Unfortunately, there was no I in there that I could incorporate integrity into it. So I found other ways to do that. But that has always been a driving force for me. And again, to use the example of the practitioner that I sold the subscription to, I knew in my gut I wasn't going to be doing him or me a favor. I was going after the money. And that was not a business decision built on integrity. And that's why I let him out of the agreement. And it turned out to work out for the best.
Yeah, and I loved what you said, that where it's around like identifying, I want to say like really being able to know yourself, right? And being able to be authentic within that. And I'm curious for you, like when you were going through, I would say like identifying that as a value for yourself, if you will, was that a thing that you ever struggled with in your life where you were like, you felt like you weren't living out who you were or didn't know yourself clear enough to like have that integrity at all?
I think it was a combination of both of those. When I was younger, and man, I've never shared this with anybody. Look at you digging under the surface. I would say that I had a very vivid imagination as a kid that would get me into a lot of trouble. Few things are worse to integrity than when you're not being honest with your parents or your friends or whatever the case may be. I later got paid a pretty good amount of money for how vivid my imagination was and my creativity and creative services and writing, but I needed to harness that into a good thing. But I think part of it also just comes with age and comes with time and comes with lived experiences. When you're around people that don't have integrity, it helps you recognize what integrity is. And when you are around people that have it and you say, that's the kind of life I want to live, I want to emulate that person, and I want to emulate how they live their life and how they speak to people and how they respect people, I think with time that comes. And to use my daughter as an example again, I think the mantra resonates with her very differently at the age of 25 as maybe it did with her when she was 7, 10, or even 15.
Sure.
Because she's living these experiences now where she's having to navigate people in her sphere of influence and her work world that maybe don't subscribe to a life of integrity. And it becomes much more dramatic and much more amplified when that's the type of life you're choosing to live.
Yeah, especially at 25. Like I think that's such a period of age where we are figuring out who we are, and we have sort of enough freedom but still enough control in various areas of our life to test parts of ourselves. Like I was kind of tearing up when you were talking about having a really vivid imagination as a kid, and how that imagination, that intuition, those things can kind of get you in trouble.
Yeah.
I remember I had a teacher in high school who made me feel like I was an idiot, where it's like when I look back at that in retrospect, I was like, oh, I was actually like a really smart kid within a class with a teacher who couldn't handle being challenged by things. Right. And I'm curious for you, part of what I heard for that journey for you, where like you're able to kind of let your integrity emerge, and like that deeper sense of self-trust is like very much about, I want to say, like finding the right environment. And I'm curious, like how did you cultivate that environment that allowed for more of that self-trust to rebuild and for that integrity of your deepest authentic self to kind of really emerge?
Well, I guess, again, I think starting a business where I had the control to set the tone for the integrity within the organization. And again, it was just me. And then I hired one person, and we would talk about integrity as just sort of a side conversation and the approach that we would take to things. And we would go on I'll call them sales calls for the sake of this conversation. And we would be left waiting for an hour to meet with the person that we had the appointment with. And I'd make a comment about, well, there's a clear breakdown in integrity right there. You're telling me that your time is more valuable than my time. I made the commitment to come to that meeting at a certain time. I actually got there a little bit early out of respect for the possibility that you may be early as well. And then you left me sitting, and we would talk about integrity while we were sitting there waiting. Where it got challenging was as the business grew, and I think we were at a maximum of 13 people at our largest at Red Apples Media, it became tougher to find people who shared that commitment to integrity because at some point you have to hire people who can just do the job.
Yeah.
And that was a difficult crossroads for me because you look at it and you say, well, if one of my core values is something that resonates with some interpretation of integrity, I'm not adhering to that in the people that I hire, but I have to hire this person because nobody else is applying for the job and I've got to get a warm body in there. That's where we started to run into some challenges as an organization.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, because it sounds like at that point, it's well, how do you actually build a culture around these values so that this can go beyond me, right? This isn't just me and my little team of merry men that are going through things and we're all in this together. It's like we're starting to hire people and you can't always be on top of those people. So what did you actually do to like instill that culture and build the culture around those values so it could be something that wasn't just there when you were there?
Yeah, and I'll admit that I failed many times during the 15 years that I was trying to do this. You know, what frustrated me was I could not understand why everybody who worked for me would not automatically want to have an entrepreneurial spirit. Why wouldn't you want to treat this business as if it was your own? This is how you're getting paid. And there were all kinds of incentive opportunities that nobody took advantage of. Why wouldn't you want to come to a job where you got to be authentic and you got to have a level of integrity? But no, you're going to try to beat me with the number of smoke breaks that you put on your time card. Or you're going to tell me that you showed up at the video shoot at 9 a.m., but the guy that you were with said you didn't show up till 9:45. You look at goofy little things like that and you say, you've got a larger issue going on if that's how you want to approach the person that is employing you and paying you and helping you live a life, keep a roof over your head and all that kind of thing. So I had to come to terms with understanding that everybody was not going to live up to what my interpretation of integrity was. And I go into this a little bit in the Red Apples way as well. One of our core values was live for what you love, work to make a difference. And I was creating all kinds of opportunities for my staff to participate in these company things that we would go out into the community and do. And participation was horrible. And the first question always was, are we getting paid? It's a Saturday morning. You wanted to do a 5K that you chose to sponsor. You didn't consult with us on that. I'm like, I shouldn't have to consult with you on whether we're going to sponsor this 5K or not. Would love for you guys to participate. It'll be fun. It'll be team building. Are we going to get paid? No, you're missing the point. Yeah. What I came to understand, though, was that they had their own causes, their own beliefs, their own passions outside of work, that actually I did hire the right people because they did have that servant's heart. They did have that loving heart. It just wasn't manifesting in the areas that I wanted it to, which didn't make them bad people. So those were some of the tug of wars that I faced along the way in trying to address some of these things.
Yeah, I'm curious how you adapted to that, because like you said, like you're looking at it from a place of, okay, well, like they care about causes. It's just not necessarily the cause that I said, or the guy is even saying, well, you didn't consult me. It's, well, like, why would it's my business. You can have all those conversations. So like, how did you actually change it? Did you end up going it back and being like, well, like, how can I support the things that you want to do? Like, how did you kind of inculcate that culture still in a different way?
And it's exactly what you just described. So what I attempted to then do was I respect the fact that you have passions and purposes beyond the four walls of this office. How can I help support you? Tell me what you're interested and involved in, and I would love to show up for you. I would love to match your financial donation if you're going to donate to whatever. And ironically, in very rare instances, they never took advantage of that. And I never understood that either. Part of it, I think, had to do with perhaps a level of privacy. I don't want you to know what I'm investing my money into or donating my money to. I don't want you to know how much I'm donating. If I'm only donating $10 to something, are you, Mr. Owner of this business, going to perceive that as being too cheap? Right? Yeah. So I had to kind of understand for myself and come to terms with that everybody was not going to be the way I wanted them to be. But as long as they had that as part of their DNA, I was okay with it. And then I did hire the right type of person, and that was manifesting in their world.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that because I think culture building, I think, is such a challenging thing to do. Because I think, like with what you said, like you have the people who are the diehards for the company and want to
Right.
do all the things and
Yeah.
are very much aligned and are more or less drinking the Kool-Aid of whatever it is that you're doing, right? And then you have, like you said, the people who, and there's different balances of that. People want to build a life outside of that, something different, but can still be huge contributors. So, like, how do you navigate that tension, I guess, between those two things? Are you, because I think some people would be like, well, then they're not a fit if they're not fully
Right.
in, and some people would be this or so. How did you like navigate that aspect for yourself, like internally? Was that like a hard thing to balance or navigate?
It was hard because, again, you look at it and you say, the life I'm living seems so obvious. Why wouldn't you want to match it? Which was incredibly arrogant on my part and very narrow-minded, and I lacked an understanding of how other people perceived those core values in their own world and their own approach to life. My other challenge was we are in a very small market. We're about an hour outside of Orlando, right? So we didn't have a really deep talent pool. So I found myself having to make some compromises. Later on, as the company continued to grow, my mindset changed, and I really started looking for people with certain work ethics and certain types of personality. And I understand that you have no knowledge whatsoever about how to write a script or how to shoot a video or how to lay out a print ad or how to design a website. I can teach you those things if you have the commitment and the DNA and the honesty to say, I'm willing and I'm interested in doing this. I think what you guys do is really cool, and I want to be a part of it. Those are the people that I started to recruit probably in the second half of the company's history.
Wait, how did you go about finding those people? Because like I hear that a lot from business owners where it's, okay, cool, like we want to focus more on people who are the right culture fit and the right DNA
Right.
and have that go-getter mentality. But when I'm looking at it from an employee standpoint, it's like there are a few companies that are like, hey, if you're a go-getter, then let me pay you $100,000 a year to do an editing job, right? It's like
Right.
you usually need some level of the skill being involved or whatever that part is. So how do you actually go about like finding that talent or within that spectrum of things?
What was cool was that we reached a point where we started to develop a reputation in the community. People started to come to us. They would see us out at events. They would see our work product out on social media or digital media or whatever the case may be. And they would inquire to us, what kind of opportunities do you have? I don't have any experience in video production, but what kind of opportunities do you have? And my response would be, what experiences do you have? And they'd start reading their resume to me, and I'd stop them and I'd say, what kind of life experiences do you have? That's really what I'm interested in at this point. There's something to be said about somebody who is responsible for a family, raising a child. Like they have a certain commitment to making sure that they show up on time, that they're committed to their job, which is not to take away anything from somebody who's maybe single. They're just driven by different things. And that was always a challenge for me, was trying to figure out what each individual was driven by. I used to say that people are driven by three things: respect, reward, and recognition. And if you can hit two of those three things, you typically have a pretty pleased employee. And so it was a matter of me trying to figure out early on during that very initial conversation that usually wasn't even an interview. It was just a conversation at a chamber breakfast or an event of some kind, or being out doing a video shoot and people walk up to you and they ask you what you're working on. Those are the conversations that I would enjoy having to see if those people would have the right personality, I keep using the word DNA, the right DNA to match who we were, and being able to teach them the skills that were going to be necessary to be successful at Red Apples Media.
Got it. That's awesome. I'm curious, you talked about like the life experience part being such a major component of it. And I'm curious for you, like when you think about like the values for Red Apple, like what's like the major life experience for you that you felt brought those about for you? Was there like a key moment you think that like you're like, I've got to do something differently?
Yeah, specific to Red Apples, core value number one is the R, respect the universe. And that drove everything for me moving forward. And it's the most difficult one to talk to people about because it is very abstract. It requires a lot of self-confidence in your willingness to surrender control and recognize your role in this larger universe. So when I was sharing the story about how I got laid off at the Villages, I literally for 6 months was in physical and mental pain getting up and going to this job. It was just really taking a toll on me, but I wasn't doing anything about it. And I absolutely believe it was the universe lacing up its boots saying, I'm giving you the time. I'm giving you the option okay, time is up, you're out, go figure out what else to do. So that was the turning point for me as far as making the change from being an employee my entire career. I always worked for somebody or something, to now being kind of in control of my own destiny. But I had never prepared for that. Some people know that they're entrepreneurs. I couldn't even spell entrepreneur, and I still need spell check to catch me once in a while. But I started to realize that through the course of my career, I was very fortunate in that I had a balance between sort of that analytical side of my brain and the creative side of my brain. And once I could figure out the direction that I thought the universe was kind of sending me, that I could make a difference in the community, I could make a difference for our clients, I could make a difference for the people that worked for me, I realized it wasn't about the business, it was about what impact could I have on those that were part of the business, sort of that universe.
Yeah, well, and that's something I'm super fascinated in, even just at the beginning of the book, talking about that value, and then obviously it kind of emerges like later throughout it, because that's a very, for lack of a better word, that's a very thing to have, this like your first value. And even looking at you, you're working in TV, you're working in these various spaces that are a little bit more, let's say like even medical space, right? It's like very kind of like hard-lined or cookie cutter in some ways.
Right.
Like, okay, you fit this particular mold. Like, where did that like really come from for you? Because I mean, obviously it was from that experience in some way, but like, why that language? Why kind of that spiritual connection to the universe, if you will? Why was that your focal point? Like, where did that emerge from?
A series of strange events that I never really connected to each other until I started to take a step back. And again, one of the biggest challenges for me earlier in my career was I was very difficult to manage. I didn't see it at the time. I even had some people tell me at the time that I'm difficult to manage, and I dismissed it because my whole mindset was, you know what, I'm really good at what I do. Just leave me alone and let me do the thing that you paid me to do. And I needed to learn some valuable lessons, but a lot of that had to do with my desire to control situations. Everything from the people around me to situations that maybe I should not be trying to control. So for me to take a step back and say, there is an entity that is bigger than me, and when I allow myself to be open to it, these pretty incredible things happen. One of the turning points for me in understanding that was actually another book. It's called The Go-Giver. And it's funny because a few minutes ago you referenced being a go-getter. And when I was first told about this book, I said, you mean the go-giver? And they said, the go-getter? I said, no, it's the go-giver. And I started to read this book, and really, to oversimplify it, and the author Bob Berg would probably hate me for doing it this way, but really what it is about making these investments back into the universe with no expectation of return and allowing the universe to feed you whatever that return might be. And so when you approach life or your business from a giving standpoint, the universe loves givers. But you have to make those deposits. You cannot make withdrawals without making deposits. And if you make the deposits with an intention of getting something in return, it usually backfires on you as well. And that just sort of became this. The more I subscribed and allowed myself to do it, or something would happen and it would be very easy for me to say, man, we really thought we were going to land that contract. That would have been a turning point for our company. That would have been big money. We could have hired more people, and it didn't go our way. I had two choices. I could either be really pissed off about it, or I could step back and go, the universe is telling us something, and it will play out. It will manifest at some point in time, whenever the universe chooses to reveal it. And I will tell you, almost on every single occasion that it was something we thought we wanted and didn't get, it almost always revealed itself as, you know what, that would have been a nightmare of a contract. That would have been a nightmare of a client. That employee, as much as you thought you wanted to hire them, was going to be so difficult to manage. And so these things started to play out for me, and it became easier for me once I opened myself up to this scenario to be able to accept the things that were going on around me, that there was a purpose and a reason for them that would eventually reveal itself. Pretty heady, right?
No, I mean, somewhat, but also I almost feel that more like in my heart. And that's kind of where I'm curious about you, because you talked about like having somebody who wants a lot of control, wanted to do all these things. And I can resonate with that a lot. Been through like a major transition in my own life, and it can be like, well, why isn't this thing working out the way that I expect it to? Or I'm doing the things that I'm wanting to do, right? So for you, I guess, how did you develop that, or what did you do to develop that ability to actually surrender and let go? Because I think it's one thing to talk about like the mental aspect of it, or, okay, intellectually this is what you do, but there's a lot of other things that go into that, the emotions, the stress, all of that kind of stuff, and doing that. So did you like start a meditation practice? What did you actually do to like practice letting go more in your life?
It just became a very conscious decision. There was no meditation, there was no yoga, there was no program that I signed up for. It just became a very conscious decision. And I was fortunate. My wife has a very similar belief. So we would kind of hold each other accountable. Something wouldn't go right. And I'd come home from work, how was your day? Well, we lost the such and such client. She's like, it's all right. It's the universe. There's a reason it happened. It probably was not because of you. And if it was because of you, then you need to learn from whatever that reason was, because that was the universe delivering a message to you or a lesson to you. Learn from it and move forward and don't do it again. It is very difficult. And I'll tell you where it gets really hard is I regard myself as being very fortunate. I've got friends who are my age. I won't say our age because I think you're younger than I am. Although I have more hair.
You do.
I've got friends that are my age that have lost spouses way prematurely, no explanation whatsoever. And they don't want to hear any conversation about the universe. It's F you, universe. Like, why would you have taken my spouse away from me? I've got a dear friend from high school who lost her son to brain cancer at the age of 16. The sweetest kid. Like, how do you reconcile that? And it's very difficult. And I don't have an answer for that. I think everybody has to define and decide in their own way what role they are willing to allow the universe to play for them. And maybe this just isn't the time for them. It took me until I was in my early 40s before I started to kind of understand it. And it took me another 10 years to not even quite master it, but be pretty good at it, to recognize when things were going on. And it's funny because I'll say things to people and they'll be like, oh, is that a universe story? I'm like, it could be. Time will tell.
Yeah. Well, that was maybe that is the answer to the question that I felt like I was going to ask anyway. But with things being either a lesson from the universe or it's not you, it's the universe kind of thing, that can be like a dangerous line to toe between sort of, I would say, outsourcing your power, right? And being, I guess it can be easy to be like, oh, well, like, it's actually all about the universe. And actually, I'm just an asshole and I should stop being an asshole for the problems that are happening in my life. Like, how do you personally, like, navigate, like, is this a me thing or is this a universe thing?
Great question. And I don't think that there's a canned answer for it. I think it depends on, for me in particular, it depends on what my state of mind is at that moment. Again, I think you and I both heard it a million times growing up. With age comes wisdom. And I always thought it was a cliche, but I do think it's true. It goes back to those lived experiences. And those experiences have taught me to not react as quickly as I did when I was in my 20s. I had a short trigger. I was quick to respond to things, and I'm much better taking a step back and just sort of evaluating and seeing what other possibilities could there be out there. One of the things I like to say a lot is you might go into a restaurant and have a horrible experience with the server. They were rude to you. They threw the plate down at you. They couldn't wait to get you out of there. I have absolutely no idea what was going on in that person's life leading up to their shift that day, let alone what they might be going home to after that shift. So who am I to judge them based on whatever that situation was? You didn't harm me in any way. It just wasn't a great meal experience, and that's okay. My life will go on. Back in my 20s, I would have been like, let me see the manager. I'm going to stiff you. I'm going to probably be equally rude back to you. But with time and those experiences, I think we sort of kind of figure out who we are and who we want to be. I cannot impose my belief in the universe on anybody. I can open up their minds to it and allow the space for them to sort of decide whether to adopt it or not on their time frame or not. I will tell you that many of my friends know that it's almost a badge of honor for me. And so when I reference the universe, they know exactly where it's coming from. And some of them have chosen to respect it and understand it as they choose to do so.
Yeah,
I'm not a preacher. I'm not trying to preach a certain gospel. It's the way that I have chosen to live my life. And again, that was part of the struggle with these values within the workplace was, this is who I am. This is where these values came from. This is what my hope is, as opposed to this is what my expectation is. As we go through some of the other values, the E in red is excellence in everything, period. That is how I approached every day. And when I failed, I was frustrated with myself. I rarely blamed anybody else unless it truly was a collaborative reason that we failed at something. And even then, the buck stops with me because I'm the guy running the show. But I was committed to striving to excellence. I couldn't understand why everybody didn't do that every minute of every day that they were on the time clock. And I had to understand that this is the way I have chosen to do it. And hopefully that will inspire you. Hopefully that will encourage you to rise to that occasion. Where it absolutely will not work is if you've got a core value that says excellence in everything and the person at the top is, we messed up, whatever, let's move on.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to wear those things from top down. And I don't care whether you're a Fortune 500 company or whether you're a 3-person mom and pop in the middle of Main Street somewhere. Those values have to start from the top. That's the only way they're ever going to have any chance of succeeding.
Yeah. Well, and with something like excellence too, and this is, I think, fun parts of the conversations. I love intersections, if you can't tell, like where things collide and like where there's crossroads with things, because I think that's where, again, it's really easy to say, oh, like excellence is great, but like excellence can also come into, I want to say, conflict with, like you've mentioned, I forget if this is an actual value, but authenticity, right? Because it might be like your excellence is here, right? But well, like part of being authentic is like being able to own like your imperfectness in some ways, right? And your ways of doing this. And there can even be that edge between, well, excellence can create that perfectionism and that other thing, and that can push things further away. So there's all these like back and forth. So how do you, I guess, how do you define excellence, and how do you like actually integrate that in a way that doesn't become the vice version of that value, if you will?
Yeah, I share a story in the book about, we did an offsite with our team and we got into a whole conversation about excellence. And one of the people that worked for me at the time challenged me, and they said, you're talking about perfection and we're never going to achieve perfection. And if that's your expectation, we're just wasting our time. And I said, no, perfection and excellence are two different things. Perfection is perhaps the result of a commitment to excellence. My objective is for you to look at everything and put your best possible effort into it. We would have people who would work on projects, and rarely did anything ever leave our shop without me putting eyes on it before it left. And there were people who kind of took the road of, well, I just need to get it 80% there, and then Mark's going to come along and polish it. My whole thing was, well, do I only have to pay you 80% of your hourly rate then? Because my expectation is that you were going to show me something that had a level of excellence to it for what I hired you to do. And that's where we would run into some of the conflict as to how others defined what excellence was. Yeah. Where it gets challenging is when you sometimes bog yourself down. Another expression that I'm sure you've heard is paralysis from analysis, right? We would get so bogged down into, is this absolutely 100% perfect, to the point that we might be late on a deadline, or we might be overthinking things, or it would cause such conflict. And I think that's where you have to have the confidence and the courage. And that's where the boss steps in and goes, you know what? I feel good about where we're at. We could spend 6 more weeks debating this thing, but we don't have the time or the budget. We feel good about what it is. Let's send it off to the client and get the feedback. And that was where we sometimes had to get into sort of the dirt and the grime of the whole commitment to excellence. But it really was intended to be something to strive for, not necessarily something to always achieve. If you go in there lazy, you're going to get lazy. If you go in there with a commitment to excellence, you have a much higher chance of achieving greatness.
Yeah, well, and I like that. I mean, what I wrote down with what you said with the perfectionism is this is like the possible outcome of the result, which is out of our control to a degree, right? But what we can't control is the effort and the quality that we're putting in. And to your point, if somebody's coming in and be like, yeah, well, my intention is to give you 80%, that's a very different like intention than coming in. My intention is to give you my best. What I'm curious about for you, especially you work in an industry where it's like you're the arrowhead in a way, right, of everything going on, and you have probably more experience and more of a standard than everybody else who's working underneath you. So like, how do you judge? And I'm honestly even just asking for my own stuff, because I can be like, oh, here's how I want my podcast trailer to look, or here's how I want these reels to go, or here's my standard for excellence, right? But that might not be their capacity yet to hit that bar yet. And so how do you go about judging that internally, whether this is something that's like, cool, they're putting their excellence forward, this is something that is going to keep continuing and growing, because there's that danger or risk to like just micromanaging and sort of like terrorizing your team and not letting them actually grow and develop. So how do you navigate that tension?
Yep, I was absolutely guilty of micromanaging creative processes. I worked for people who were micromanagers of the creative process. And those are the ones that I locked horns with. Why did you hire me to produce this thing if all you were going to do is produce it the way you wanted to? And if that's the way you wanted it, why didn't you just tell me that up front? We could have saved a whole lot of time and aggravation. And again, that was my creative arrogance. I've won 3 regional Emmy Awards, and I mentioned several Telly Awards. So I looked at those and I said, look, obviously I'm doing something right, because otherwise they wouldn't be giving me awards. So get out of my way and let me do my thing. And that never really flew very well, as you could well imagine. So I used that as a way to approach my people with, as long as you were showing me an effort. Everybody knew kind of what my pedigree was. And that is not a pat on my back. That's not me trying to be egotistical. All you got to do is Google me, and they're going to see who it is that they're coming to work for and sort of what my experience was and the things that I achieved. So my hope was, part of the reason you wanted to come work for me was because you were going to learn from me. That was my commitment to you. But you had to be willing. We talk about the different types of people. Those that are willing and able, those are willing but unable, and those are unable but willing. And I always like the unable but willing, because those are the ones you can teach. The willing and able are great. The unable but willing are teachable. And so as long as you were willing to come along for the ride, learn from the mistake, fix the mistake, take ownership of the mistake, and grow from that, you were going to be better at what you were hired to do as a result of being here. Look, to your point, how many podcasts have you produced so far?
This is my 57th or 8th or something like
Right.
that.
So if you go back and you look at probably your first 5 versus where you are now, from a production standpoint, from a conversational standpoint, and you've seen how you've grown, and you're probably getting much closer to what your original level of what you believed your excellence in these podcasts was going to be. And 50 from now, you're going to be like, man, that Red Apples guy just completely dragged me down, man. Never bringing that guy back on again.
No, you've been great. Yeah, I mean, what I hear a lot in that is like looking for traits that are coachable, right? I think it's one of the things I look for, both with people who work above me, but also people who work sort of below me, is like, how well are you receiving feedback, right? And I would say for me, which I think is going to pivot into a good question for you, is with the people I consult with, I have a similar, I would say, journey where I left a company because I felt like there wasn't a level of integrity there that was preached at one point, and I think was there and then fell away. And then kind of when I got down to my own values, and like with a career coach, I was like, one of the most important things to me is be able to be like myself. And part of myself is like being able to kind of call out the leadership when they're not like responding to things, and they're not living in the things that they say that they want to. Yep. And there's one of the companies I consult with, I've told them like, I'm addicted to working with you, because even though we've had to have multiple different hard conversations throughout that, every time we've had one, you take it and you do something with it. You don't you don't push it away. You're not in denial, because it's so. I think you're really aware of this, but when you're at the top of the company, it can be really hard for employees to tell you the truth, right? The higher, the more power you get, the more likely it is that people around you are just going to want to yes you, because like they say the wrong thing, their livelihood is at stake, right? And so there's sort of 2 questions. I'll ask this one first, since I think it's most relevant to this. Is what did you do to create a culture that allowed people to address those things with you within your business? Because I think that was something that was really prominent throughout the entire book. And I think it's a very vulnerable thing to share, is you do share so much about your failures, and you do share about people speaking to you and addressing to you these various things, and then you listened. And that is a rare quality. I will say that very much. There's a lot of people talk about doing that, and not a lot of people who actually follow through on that. So what did you actually do to cultivate a culture that allowed you to be challenged appropriately?
So can we put a pin on that? Can I flip the mic?
Sure.
Because you said something I want to ask you about.
Sure.
As a consultant, do you find that your clients listen to you with different ears and filters than they would their own staff? I mean, I'm sure you've met with like teams to kind of peel back the onion, and they've told you, look, we've told this guy time and time again, he's late for meetings, he doesn't respect us, blah, blah, blah. But that person doesn't hear it until they hear it from an outside source. Do you find that with some of the clients you work with?
My answer is yes and no. So what I find, the way that I guess I approach it is, when all of that is data, but it's not truth. right? I think even like the goal of my podcast is that I really value perspective. And I think that we're all sort of blind man fumbling around the elephant and being like, hey, what is this thing? I think it's a hairbrush. I think it's a tree. And as we start to talk to each other, we start to learn a little bit more. And so the way that I've kind of approached that is I will listen to them. Okay, what's the business owner's issue? I want to go listen to all of the different employees and take that in. And the reality is that there's truth to everything that everyone's saying, right? But a lot of times it's, if I go in and I was talking to the business owner and I were to go in and say, hey, you're being a dick, you're not respecting your employees, that's going to get the same result that they got. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm an outside person. I think there is some value to that in some different ways because I can communicate things. But like a lot of times what I do as best I can is, even gathering all that information, I suspend as much disbelief as possible. And then I ask from a place of just genuine curiosity to sit down. Well, I want to understand from their perspective what's going on. And what you find sometimes is when I'm sitting with a business owner is it's, well, yeah, like I took out a huge ass loan to be able to keep my employees having a job for 3 years through this thing that I'm paying for and dealing with, and none of them have ever even said thank you. Yeah. And so to have that and be like, oh, that's what's going on for you.
Right.
Like that. And now I can be like, okay, let me build a bridge then between the two of you of where this conflict is happening and help that manage, because there often is, because I think in some ways, a lot of times it's like the business owner doesn't feel safe to be able to be vulnerable with their people, which I think that can create a culture of lack of vulnerability, which isn't necessarily the best. But I think that's kind of the way that I approach it, is it's like collecting data, doing that. And I think to your point, even just going back to sales, because I think in a lot of ways consulting, persuasion, if you want to call it, I don't necessarily always like that phrase either, but it's just a lot of listening. And when you listen and you actually hear what they're feeling and seeing and what their goals are, a lot of times it's like very simple. It's all, you have this problem. You know that here are the two solutions to it. You're not going to do that one. So we just have to actually find a way that you actually do this other thing that you already know that you want to do. And it's just hard. And we just got to make that happen. And so I see it, that's kind of how I approach it, I guess.
There were a couple clients that we got so entrenched with into their organization, which was always such a huge compliment to me and my team, that we became advisors, which was incredibly meaningful. We would have office managers who would call me and say, look, I've been trying to get him to purchase this piece of software and he just doesn't see it, doesn't want it. Can you help me get him to understand why this would be a valuable investment into our office? And I would basically pitch the same exact thing that the office manager did, and the owners, yeah, why aren't we doing that? And on one hand, they'd be frustrated. They were like, well, why didn't you just listen to me? I'm like, doesn't matter. We did this together. We ultimately got what you believed was in the best interest of the business. Yeah. We did it together. That's cool. And that's why I was kind of curious whether you sometimes found that your voice, or sometimes it's even the presentation, you could take the same 5 words and present it differently than it was previously presented and get a whole different response. So, yeah,
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think the presentation of it, and that's kind of what I was going to say with that too, is I think I have developed a lot of fine-tuned communication skills partly because I had 2 parents that fought all the time. And so you start listening to like where people are saying the wrong things or like saying the right things in the wrong way.
Right.
And I think like when you're talking from those different points, and that's where I go back to the listening part, is it's like when you're talking with somebody and you understand that pain that they're dealing with or their perspective with the issue, you can then talk to it better. You can say, hey, I get that you're feeling this way and that other stuff. And if this is what you want to do, like, how do you want to approach that? And then you're collaborating with them to find a deal. And I'm a big person that's, look, if there's a desire from both parties to do a thing, there's a way to figure it out. Right. And so just coming from that scope of it. And then, I do also think like being the outside person has a benefit, because I'm also not as at risk and I don't have an entrenched history with that person that can sometimes bleed into the baggage of why someone's listening or not listening to a particular person. But
something else you hit on in your explanation that I thought was interesting was during COVID, I took about a 30% pay cut. I made a commitment that I said, look, we're not going to be able to continue to do the things that we are used to doing, but I will find things for us to do. And as long as you're okay with that, no one's going to lose an hour's worth of pay for however long this thing goes on. Now, nobody knew that I took a pay cut. It was just a matter of me making sure that I was keeping money in the bank. Typically, a good business person will pay everybody, pay all your bills, Look at the end of the month and say, what is a reasonable amount for me to take home this month to pay my own bills? So nobody knew that I was doing it. It wasn't something that I was waving a banner and saying, thanks to me, you're all keeping your job. But what was interesting was coming out of COVID, I was exhausted. We went through a really difficult time, but we kept the business going. We stayed profitable. Everybody stayed employed. And I just did not feel any gratitude whatsoever. It was almost like this expectation of, well, you're the boss. It's up to you to figure out how you're going to keep us employed. Meanwhile, we're looking around, we're seeing all these other businesses are laying people off. They're shutting down entirely because they didn't have a financial foundation to be able to lean back on if they needed to. They didn't have the ability or the vision to pivot into different resources or services, which is very much what we did. And I felt a pretty high level of resentment that I talk about a little bit in the book. And that was one of the things that sort of triggered for me, maybe it's time for me to think about selling the company. So your reference to that kind of struck a little bit of a chord for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about it. Like when you're looking back at that and you look at I want to say the culture of gratitude that was maybe absent in that time, are there things you think you would do differently at all? So would you do something to have been more open or vulnerable about what you were going through with them? Or like, how would you approach it? Because I think you even talk about a different instance with the guy who was running over you, right? When there was a bigger crisis that they were all going through the day that the helicopter crash happened, right?
Right.
So I'm curious, even seeing that pattern, like what comes up for you around that?
I was not very good at allowing myself to be vulnerable. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that I was put into managerial positions pretty early in my career. And again, I think they were a function of my creative talents without anybody teaching me how do you take creative talents and how does that translate into being a good leader, a good manager. And so I was put into some positions that I probably was not qualified for on paper. And I think some of that translated as my career went on. I was always very guarded. I remember when it was time for me to go buy a new car when I was running Red Apple's media, and I was very conscious of what kind of car was I going to buy. And some of that came from, again, these lived experiences. I remember very clearly going to meet with a doctor who told me what I was offering was way overpriced, it wasn't worth it, but thanks for coming by. And as we're walking out of his office, because it was like at the end of the day after he'd seen all of his patients, he was like, hey, you see my new car? Is that beautiful? And he shows me his new Porsche. And I'm thinking to myself, well, no wonder you don't have money to invest into marketing. You're buying yourself a fancy car. So I was very conscious of what the perception of me was going to be as a business owner. I felt like I was paying my people fairly. I felt like I was treating them fairly. But there was always this wall that I had up, which I was conscious of. It wasn't like I didn't realize I was doing it. Never really became social friends with people that worked for me. Sometimes after they left, I continued friendships with them, but always had sort of that wall to kind of protect me from, I don't want to get too close to you because if something goes south, it's going to be really hard on both of us.
Yeah, it's interesting too because it's almost what you talked about earlier on with like some of your employees, right? Where you were like, oh, I want to get to know you more, but like they had their own little wall up. So it's like I can almost see where it's like there's that. It's business. I think is so fascinating because it comes at such a mirror, right? Like the business is such a reflection of the owner a lot of the times. The owner's involved.
Yep.
And seeing that connection between them. Is that something you wish you had developed more of? Is like creating more of that vulnerability?
You know, I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. I think in my heart, I wish I did. But I think the business side of me recognizes that is to some degree a necessary evil. I think you hear it a lot with entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners, is either they get too close to their staff, that it makes it difficult for them to make smart business decisions, or they stay closed off to their staff, which makes it difficult for them to know you as a person. We would have a staff meeting every Monday morning. And every Monday morning was like, hey guys, what'd you do this weekend? What movies did you go see? What new streaming service did you check out? What restaurant or what event did you go to? And we'd go around the room and everybody would say what they did. And nobody ever said, what'd you do this weekend, Mark? Never. And it was funny because on one hand, it would drive me insane. But on the other hand, I was like, good, because I don't really want to have to tell you what I did this weekend. I feel badly telling you that my wife and I did a weekend getaway just because we felt like it, because I know that you're just trying to make ends meet. So there was sort of that constant struggle with how much to share and how much not to share. And I know sometimes it came across as being kind of a cold jackass, but it was never intended to be that way. Yeah. It's tricky. It's a tricky balance.
Yeah, no, that's super fascinating. Like even... Yeah, I think it's such a dynamic within business and like the ownership and employees, right? Where on one hand, it's you, like you're making money, you've built the business, and you're going through all the stresses and challenges of making a business, which is really intense and also something you chose and all those things, right? But then so you, on one hand, deserve like the payoff for those things, right? But then it is also all the team that is like making all those things happen, right? And so it can be this uncomfortable dynamic. And I'm even curious, and if this is too personal, feel free to not answer, but how did you go about figuring out, like, I'm saying, how much to take away from the business from like your own financial profit, right, versus reinvesting, or do I pay back into my employees and that kind of thing? Like, how did you balance and navigate that aspect of it for yourself?
That was a little bit tricky. I had a good bookkeeper who basically created some formula opportunities for me that said, look, if you make this an emotional decision month to month, chances are either you're going to overvalue yourself or undervalue yourself. The trick is to keep a certain amount of money in the bank. Look at what the future is. If you see there's going to be an opportunity that you need to buy a bunch of more equipment in the next 6 months, you probably want to sock a little bit more away. We've been a 2-household income. My wife is very successful and accomplished in her job. So it wasn't like I was the sole breadwinner.
Yeah.
And so that allowed me to be a little bit, I probably was more conservative than most would be. But again, when COVID rolled around, there was a bit of a sigh of relief going, holy cow, we weren't living month to month because I was draining money out of the business every month. We kept a good pad in there. And it's funny because I look back and I did a panel discussion at the local college a couple of weeks ago talking to a bunch of students. And I said, look, when I started out, I kept my books on an Excel spreadsheet. And if I had $1,000 in the bank at the end of the month, that was a good month for me. Basically, the first 3 months, all I did was reimburse myself for mileage and expenses. I didn't pay myself anything. It was all reimbursement. And then when you reach a point that you're looking at 6 figures sitting in the bank as a cushion for whatever your needs might be, it gives you a pretty good sense. Now, there are people who are going to watch this podcast and go, 6 figures, I got 7 and 8 figures sitting in the bank. Right? And that's fine. It's all scaled to whatever your business and what your situation is. I was always very conscious of making sure that I believed I was paying what people were worth. I went through a period of time where kind of a controversial period, where I did away with pay increases and put everybody basically on a bonus structure that was tied to the success of the business. Yeah. And I ran the numbers and I said, look, the bottom line is you are going to make more money this way, but this was my effort to try to get them to be more entrepreneurial, which we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
If you took more ownership in the business, then you should get more out of the business, more than just your standard 3 or 4% pay increase each year just because you've been here for another year. Are you really bringing 3% or 5% more to the business because you got better at what you did? Or is there just this annual expectation you're going to get more money? And part of that came from, there was a period of time where I worked in a sales department at a TV station, although I was not a salesperson. I was their marketing person. And I started to realize I would go out on these sales calls with the reps, and we would do these meetings with potential clients. We'd come back. I would do all the work, putting together all the creative proposals. They would go back and sell it, and they'd make all the commission. And I'm like, wait a minute. I should be getting a little something out of this. And so that was one of those lessons that made me believe that everybody, no matter what your title was, you should have a vested interest in the financial growth of the business beyond what you're paid for on an hourly basis. I tried that for about 1.5 years, and it did not go well. They absolutely made more money, but the thing that I did not recognize was that it made it very difficult for them to plan. How do I know whether I can buy a car this year if I don't know how much I'm going to be bringing home each month? Because the bonuses were based at the mid-year and at the end of the year. And the end of the year was always the biggest one because we could step back in December and go, okay, here's what our total success and profit was for the year. I'm dividing it up. Here's somewhere between 12 and 15% of what you were making, as opposed to if I had just given you 3% for your annual increase. Yeah. But it was a very foreign way for people to be able to manage their own expenses. How do you plan for a vacation if you don't know? Do I plan to go to Disney for a week in December if I don't know how much my bonus may or may not be? But at least if I know what my 3 or 4 or 5% was each year, I can plan around that number. Right. So the intention was good, but it backfired in large part because even the financial side, there was a lack of sort of an entrepreneurial way of looking at things.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because what I was thinking about as you're talking about it was like you almost need to provide like a level of like financial education and support with them so they can learn to like navigate that, right? And that becomes like another job on top of itself. And I'm somebody I'm a big fan of revenue share and percentages and that kind of thing as well in general because I think the same thing. I mean, I think about one of the jobs I had a decent commission rate, and even though I was the salesperson, I was involved with so many other aspects of the business because I knew if the business was succeeding, we did well. And so that couldn't just stop with me being the person that they talked to on the phone and send them on the way. It was like, no, I want to make sure that the program's good. I want to make sure that they're getting the things that they want, right? And and you're seeing that reflect in your paycheck. You're like, yeah, I want to keep doing that. But I hear there was like a struggle with it. I'm curious if like you were to go back or you were going to help somebody with a similar problem now, would you tweak that approach in some way and like kind of find a balance between the raises and the kind of commission structure, I guess?
Yeah, I think there is a balance in there. I think one of the things that I would do differently was it started out as a mid-year and an end of year in the first year that I did it. The second year, I heard some feedback. Again, going back to your point about you have to be careful about what you say to the boss because you don't want to put your job at risk. I changed it to a quarterly structure, which I thought was going to make things a little bit more predictable for them, but the number wasn't as big. So the perception of, and I'll make these numbers up, at the end of the year, you got a $10,000 bonus is sexier than $2,500 at the end of March, right? So the perception of what those dollars meant to them. So I think there was probably a balance in there. I did go through a period where I tried to create individual performance type bonuses, but the metrics on that was very difficult for what we did and how we did it. Like, how do you look at an editor and say, if you could edit that piece 6 hours faster, I'll give you an extra $100.
Right. And you spend all your time doing analytics of your commission structure versus like actually doing the work and getting paid and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah.
But it was eye-opening for me to kind of take that step back because, as I said, my pay each month was unpredictable.
Right.
And so for me to say, look, you at least have 95% of your salary is predictable. You know how much you're going to get with each paycheck based on the hours that you're working. Here's your swing in there. Here's that 5%, which could be really great. Or, guys, we had a rough month, and you know that as well as I do. You weren't going out on as many video shoots. You weren't creating as many websites. You can tell we had a slower month for whatever the reason was. The bonus just isn't as big. And now I'm a bad guy because I didn't turn out a bonus, but I was still paying myself at the end of the month. So
yeah,
it's tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. The idea, and I'm curious about this that comes through my head, is I almost wonder if and I don't know how challenging this would be from a number standpoint, but I'm almost curious, like if you were like, hey, you can choose at any point, like on a yearly basis, you can choose whatever you want. You can either choose to be in this sort of bonus structure or you can choose to be in the flat raise portion of it. I wonder almost if people had the choice to, and like then they could, over time, if people would see, well, hey, the people who are getting the bonus thing are like making substantially more money more consistently. I wonder if that would evolve, if it's just the being out of control of how that happens, right, versus the choice of it, if you will.
Right. It's the difference between the people who invest in a mutual fund and the people who invest in a volatile stock like NVIDIA or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
With the risk comes a reward. If you made the choice to go for the quarterly bonus, but we had a rough quarter, you're not going to get the bonus. And the person sitting in the booth next to you maybe made 3% more because they went for the pay increase instead of the bonus. So,
right. Yeah.
But look, I took a lot of pride in the fact that we were very smart at how we managed our finances. We were generous with our community. I made a commitment that we were going to give back 3% of our revenue each year in a form of either cash donations, sponsorships, or in-kind services. That was an important thing for me as well. It's not one of the core values, other than if you want to kind of put it under that work to make a difference. That was probably one of the things that would check that box. So that was an important part of the business as well. It wasn't just about how much money could I take out at the end of the month. It was never about that. Never about that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's, a lot of the conversation that you and I have had, and even the book, is you're a very values-driven person. And I know that you've talked about it, like connecting it with your wife, and you talked about your daughter a little bit. And I'm curious about how do these values like lead, connect, and are supported by like with your family and your role as like both a husband and a father?
So our daughter experienced the day that I got laid off. It wasn't the first job that I lost, but she wasn't around for the others. Earlier in my career, things happened for whatever reason, but she experienced that one. And We weren't the type that were going to like whisper up behind the door. We wanted her to be aware of what was going on, what was the potential impact that was going to happen, and how was I going to respond to that. I felt very, very conscious of the fact that she was watching to see how were mom and dad going to respond to this situation. And I remember if she would fall down, my wife would go over and she'd say, "Are you hurt or was it scary?" We always believe that if you let the child, "Oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay?" They're going to respond to that, right? Mm-hmm. So it was always a little bit more of sort of an even keel approach when she was little. So we made the decision it was going to be an even keeled approach because of what we were going to now go through as a family. We tried to make sure dance classes were non-negotiable. That was like her passion at the time. She was not going to miss out on dance class. She was going to a Montessori school at the time. That was non-negotiable. We were going to make sure she could stay in school. This was an investment in her future. This was a setback for me. I didn't know how long it was going to be before I kind of rallied again. But there were certain things that we said, we're not going to sacrifice these types of things. But on the other hand, I used to joke that for the longest time, we live an hour from Disney. For the longest time, we never took her to Disney, but she thought we did because we would take her to like downtown Disney where all the shops and stuff are, and she'd think that was Disney. So we were able to get away with that for a little while until she caught on. But now you're going, "Hey kid, I'm sorry, but a day at Disney is going to cost us like $600 between the three of us. Let's not plan to do that right now. No. Let's kind of keep that in our back pocket and work with us while we transition through this thing." So the values were something that we wanted to be part of our household. Goofy little things, right? Talk to parents about this. When I do speaking engagements, one of the things I talk about is if one of your values is that Sunday dinner, everybody's home for Sunday dinner, non-negotiable. That's awesome. Unless you're all sitting at the table on your phones during Sunday dinner, then is it really serving the purpose that it was intended to be? We used to tell our daughter, you cannot take your phone to your bedroom with you at night. And we didn't either. And the three of us would leave our phones out on the kitchen counter. We had a landline at the time, so God forbid there was an emergency with one of our parents or something like that, they knew how to get in touch with us. But we believed that if we were going to instill a certain value, which was whether it was because of sleep, whether it was because of anxiety, whatever it was, privacy, we don't take our phones to the bedroom with us at night. Period. End of discussion. And that was cool. Where it was really interesting was when she would have friends sleep over. And we were like, "Hey, house rule, we don't take our phones to the bedroom with us." And they'd be like, "Well, that's not how it is in my house."
Right.
I understand that. And I'm going to encourage you for one night, play along with us. And if you wake up at 3 a.m. and you find like you're shaking and jittering because you don't have your phone with you, then come and get it. But just try one night without the phone. I like a 50% batting average in success with that, and trying to negotiate with a 12-year-old girl why she can't take her phone to the bedroom with us when her parents allow it. Although batting 500 gets you into the Hall of Fame, so I think that was a pretty good record. So those are just some examples of how we tried to instill that whole idea of trying to live a life that our child was watching, our kid was watching. And as she got older, we started to see it. We started to see her passion for impacting her community. Some of the stuff that she did would just make us so proud. And she didn't think about it in terms of, oh, am I going to wind up on the local Fox news station because they came out to do a story about this one-stop prom shop that she came up with and instituted at her high school? True story. But she didn't do it for the publicity. She identified an opportunity and did what she saw her parents do on a regular basis. My wife is part of a student mentor program. She has been a mentor, I think, for 12 or 13 years now, one of the longest tenured mentors. And so our daughter to be able to see, we used to tell her all the time, big kids take care of little kids. So as she got a little bit older, she started to kind of look out for the younger kids, especially when she was at school. Big kids take care of little kids. And it was just sort of that overall theme and culture, right? Not just in our business, but in our household. Yeah. So it's kind of cool now to see it. Now it's getting tougher. She's in her mid-20s. Her own belief systems are really starting to take shape. She's dealing with some real adulting situations. And she'll say to me, "Don't you dare play the universe card with me on this situation. I don't care if it is the universe. I'm pissed off about it. I don't like it. I don't want to hear about it." And so she's heading me off at the pass before I can even play the game with her. So that's kind of fun too. But there are times where she does start to recognize it. And she and I went to a concert together with a couple of her friends a few months ago, and we got into this conversation about the universe, and I could just see her friends glazing over. It's a very abstract thing to think about. But it is kind of interesting to see from her perspective now, like I said, in her mid-20s, to see how some of these things that we try to instill in her directly and through almost an osmosis approach, how is this starting to take shape in her life? And what will be interesting is Can she find friends and a partner of some kind somewhere down the way? She's wrestling with a little bit in her workplace because she has a certain expectation of what integrity looks like in the workplace, and she's wrestling with that a little bit with some of the people that she works with. But these are all those lived lessons that I think will make us better as long as we stay open to understanding that everything is not going to go our way.
Yeah, I'm curious about that for you. Obviously, it's employees are one thing to be like, oh yeah, you can handle these values sort of in your own way. And then your daughter is a different level of attachment and care and all of these things that go into that. Like, how do you, I'm going to say, keep encouraging these values and like at the same time, like allow her own belief systems to emerge and support her sense of integrity to herself, not necessarily just your idea as a parent of what I want for my daughter. Like, how do you navigate that?
It changes constantly. She ages as she, like I said, develops sort of her own personality and her own belief system. I think we did a pretty good job. I'll give my wife the majority of the credit, but I think we did a pretty good job raising her. It's wonderfully, it means a lot to us when somebody makes a comment like, you did such a great job with her. She's such a good kid. We're not surprised at all with her successes. She had to achieve those successes, but we also understand what our responsibility was as parents to create that foundation for her. I'm very comfortable with the foundation, how she builds on that foundation. I have to constantly remind myself she is no longer a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old. And we'll have conversations now where we talk to her every single night. She'll call us every single night. She lives in Kansas City, and there are times where she'll vent, and I'll flat out say, are you venting or do you want feedback? Because my natural inclination as a dad is to weigh in with my opinion on what you're going through, and here's how I would handle it if I were you. But I've gotten better, I think, at are you venting or are you looking for feedback? And there are times where she'll just say, no, I just needed to get that off my chest. And other times where she'll be like, yeah, I could kind of use some advice on this. So knowing that we've got that kind of relationship, that she knows that we're a resource that are available to her when she needs us, but that we also hopefully have the discipline to know when to step back and let her kind of go through it on her own. We have to look, we just started another 1-hour conversation when we start talking about kids and how to raise them. We believe that you have to allow your kids to make mistakes, to fail. My approach has always been, my kid is on a 3-lane highway. My wife is the bumper on one side. I'm the bumper on the other side. Go between the lanes. That's fine. That's up to you. But once you start to go off the road, that's where we step in and we kind of bounce you back onto the highway again. Some lanes are the fast lanes. Some lanes are the slow lanes. Some lanes have a lot of traffic, and others you are just soaring along as you damn well please. And that's what our approach to parenting has been. A lot of it kind of comes from those same types of values.
Yeah, I love that as a visual. I think that's a beautiful analogy to good parenting. So yeah, that's great. I'm curious, the other person that has come up a bunch in this conversation, but we haven't dived a lot into, and we are running near the time, but I'd kill myself if I didn't ask, is what is the role or impact that your wife has had for you throughout this entire journey in your personal development and becoming more values driven and becoming the business owner and person that you became? What role did she play in all of that?
She's been incredibly patient, incredibly supportive. She and I met working together in television. She was a news producer and I was a promotions producer. And I'll tell you a very quick fun story. She worked the night shift, I worked the day shift. So she was producing the nighttime newscast, and I would have to walk through the newsroom at night to get to my car at the end of my shift. And I walked through one night, and there was this young lady who was relatively new to the station, who I kind of knew, but not really. And she is cursing like a sailor. Like, she is just fired up. I'm like, what is going on? She's like, I locked my effing keys in my car, and I got to get on my newscast is on in 4 minutes, and I don't know what I'm going to, blah, 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 and F this and F that. I'm like, whoa, hang on. Time out. I'll get your keys for you. What are you going to do? Don't break my window. I'm like, I'm not going to break your window. I'm from New Jersey. I can get into your car. And that was back when, if you knew how to properly manipulate a coat hanger, like, you can't do it anymore, but with the manual locks, if you knew how to do it properly, you could pop the lock and get into the car. And I knew how to do it. And I said, go do your newscast. Your keys will be waiting for you when you get back from your newscast. I promise no damage to your car. Went into the green room, grabbed a coat hanger, did my thing, popped the lock, put the keys, went home. Got a call from her that night. Oh my God, thank you so much. And that was sort of like the beginning of our friendship. We were friends for quite some time before we started to date. I think I was very fortunate in which I found somebody who had a lot of the same foundational values that I did, but also recognized some of the crap that she was buying into, again, early in my career, and a little bit of my arrogance. But we dated. We were together for 9 years before we finally got married. I told her I was tired of giving away the milk for free. Nobody believes that story. But and we've been married for 26 years with a pretty good kid. At one point, I bought a house. We moved to Jacksonville, Florida for a startup job that I wound up losing after about 4 months. And here we are stuck with a house. So she rode the roller coaster pretty hard with me during all of this. And even during the course of getting laid off and then starting up this company, she had just started up her own company 6 months earlier. So she didn't really have a lot of revenue coming in, but we were also very similar in our beliefs about money. We both came from pretty thrifty families and never really overspent, never lived beyond our means. So it wasn't catastrophic that we could go probably a good 6 months before the finances started coming back in again. And it would have been very easy for her to be mad at me, to blame me, to tell me, quit screwing around with this hometown TV thing, go get yourself a job. But she has always been incredibly supportive. Even as parents, it's spoken and unspoken, but we will never disagree in front of the child, ever, even to this day. If she's leading a conversation that I don't necessarily agree with the direction that it's going, I will just shut my mouth and we'll go into the bedroom that night and I'll say, I don't know that I would have approached it that way. And here's why. And we may agree or disagree, but we never disagreed in front of her. And I think that's a big part of, I think, our success in parenting as well. So the very first Emmy I won, I was actually at a conference and wasn't available to get it. And she was my girlfriend at the time. So she went to the Emmy Awards and she received the Emmy for me. And as I reference at the end of the book, it's actually one of the last lines in the book is that she thanked all the people that she knew I was going to want to thank. And then she said, and I'm sure he'd want to thank me for all of my love and support all this time. And she was right. Then and now, she's absolutely right. So it's been a good partnership.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. I mean, I think even what you talked about with the way that you intentionally have not disagreed in front of your kid. I definitely grew up with my parents arguing all the time. That's like such a very intentional, I would say, gift to give your kid. And was that a very conscious choice that you two made together? Like, how did you come about that? I'm curious.
I think it initially came instinctively. And then as she got a little bit older and the issues got a little bit more challenging, I do recall that we said, look, we never need to contradict each other in front of each other. We never want, in front of her, we never wanted to be in a situation where she played us off of each other. And there were a couple of times, look, kids get manipulative. Even the best kids get manipulative. I'm sure you weren't at all. You seem
not at all.
Straight and narrow kind of guy. But, we always made sure that we didn't give her that opening to try that route, thinking, well, look, she's a daddy's girl, straight up. And my wife will tell you that. She's an absolute mini-me. We do a lot together. We relate to things a lot more than she and my wife do. Not that they don't have a wonderful relationship, but like my daughter loves sports. She loves going to concerts. She loves traveling, all that kind of stuff. So we always had to make sure that we were never going to be pitted against each other. And by showing that we always had a united front, at least on the face of it, made it much more difficult for her to be able to do that. So it was very intentional and continues to be. We'll have these evening conversations with her, and whichever one of our two phones she calls, it's on speaker so we can both hear the conversation. And inevitably one of us will kind of take the lead on the conversation. And if the other one supports it, we'll chime in. If the other one doesn't, we'll just kind of lay back. I think she's kind of caught on to that by now. If Dad's not saying something, that means that maybe Dad has a different opinion on this. But yeah, it was very conscious and continues to be so.
Beautiful. Well, Marc, we're kind of running near the end of the show. And one question I always ask my guests is just, what's a question that you would have for the audience that might shift their perspective or have them think about something in a different way?
I tell a story that I think forces people to think about what their values are. And I really punctuate the word core. The core values are the ones that are just part of our DNA. They are part of our everyday way of living. And I joked earlier, you may say that you're a law-abiding citizen, but do you steal a grape from the grocery store because you want to taste them before you buy the package? Do you drive 75 in a 60? Do you take a full stop at the red light before you make the right-hand turn? Can you relate to any of those?
Yeah, I feel that.
Right. So I think really part of it is really taking a look at, and you can break this into a couple levels. You can have that conversation with yourself from a business standpoint. One of the very first people who read The Red Apple's Way works for a large organization that has their own core values. But one of his takeaways was, how is he applying those core values to his department? And the book kind of challenged him to think about, how was I utilizing those? Were they just up on the wall in the break room, or was I using them as a way to hold people accountable, myself included? Was I using it as a way to differentiate our department from other parts of the organization as a go-to department? One of the core values is solutions always provide more value than no or I can't. I want to be the solutions department. How do I convey that to the rest of the company? And so that's how he sort of interpreted existing core values into, was I really treating them as core values? So I think the question I would pose to people is, what are your values? And it really is, it's an internal conversation. Where did they come from? And most importantly, how do other people see you emulate those values? Right? Does somebody look at, when I'm in a situation, somebody goes, yeah, I heard Mark badmouthing me the other day. I need 5 people to stand up and go, I've known Mark almost his entire life, and he's never been the type to badmouth somebody in public to somebody. So I don't know what you think you heard, but that's so out of his character, I can't imagine that it's true.
Yeah,
You know?
I think that's great when you're living in that integrity. And I like the deeper question of how do I behave such that people perceive me in those values, essentially, right? How do I actually thinking about not just internally I feel this way and internally I feel like I'm acting out this way, but I'm taking that next step and, well, how are other people perceiving me through that same lens? If not, maybe there's something worth shifting or changing about my behavior.
Right. Has this conversation done anything for you? I mean, has it unlocked anything for you? Anything you would want to share with your audience?
I think there's a lot of things, but I think for me, it's coming down to identifying what your values are for yourself. And even when I was writing that down, I wrote down, what are your values? And I think that your part is, for me, the key line, right? Because it to your point, you even asked, where do these values come from? And a lot of times our values come from our parents, our church, our community, they're all given to us. So being able to take the time to sit down and be like, well, what do I really care about? What are the things that actually drive me? Why do those things drive me? What does that mean or look like to me? How do I define that? And then for me, it's I almost see that integrity piece as sort of living in alignment with what I believe to be true, right? And so finding that integrity within myself or yourself and being able to be cool, this is what I'm willing to die on, if you will, right? This is what I'm willing to believe and navigate the world through. And I think when talking to you and reading your book too, I think it's powerful to also see the value, even if there's not an immediate payoff, in following that integrity and following those pieces, like you mentioned the doctor earlier on, right? And also just the connection of how that has bled into and been affected by all of your relationships. I really enjoyed even just talking about some of these different business ideas with you around how do you incorporate a structure in these different ways. And I appreciate you asking me about listening stuff, or how you would come about it from a consulting angle, because I think there's just a lot of value in these things for people. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Anywhere you want to send people to before we sign off?
You can check out theredapplesway.com, which is the book website. And if you're interested by any chance in having me join your organization, your event for speaking, it's marcroberts.com, Mark with a C, Roberts with a Z.com. And the book is available in print and digital on most of the major platforms. And we're working on the audio version right now. So hopefully in the next month or so, we'll get that out there.
Beautiful. Well, thanks again, Mark. This has been great having you on, and we'll have to do it again in the future.
Cheers. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Ciao.